Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me okay. As Sam said, as Danielle said, sorry, we have had a few technical difficulties. So I can't operate the slides. I have my trusty associate Sam in the background doing so. So sorry if there's any slight delay on moving things along, but I know we are running a little bit behind now. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. It's great to have people on this call, and we will kick off. My name's Helen McGuire. I am the former CEO and co-founder of a platform called Diversely, and we are going to run through the why, the what, and the how of inclusive hiring. But before we do so, let's just learn a little bit about why I'm here and what we're going to be running through in the next half an hour or so. Sam, if you wouldn't mind moving it along. For those of you who don't know, Diversely is a DE&I tech platform. We help a business to understand their data and then to make informed decisions about inclusive hiring with 3 AI-powered inclusive hiring tools, all as part of our platform. We were recently acquired by the Access Group, and we will now form part of their many solutions internally. And I've been working in diversity and inclusion for many years now, around 8 years across the Middle East, Asia, US, and the UK. So I have quite a broad perspective on diversity and inclusion and really what's required in order to get your business in a good place for attracting diverse candidates and ensuring that you are running an inclusive hiring approach. And that's what we're going to be running through today. 3 different parts, basically. The first part to kick off is just defining what DE&I is. There are many different variations of those 3 or even 4 letters, and why it's important in a broader context for businesses. Secondly, around the issues around measurement and biases. So what are some of the classic hurdles that we face as businesses? And thirdly, how we can then overcome them. So in part 3, just explaining a little bit about how we work and indeed how you guys can overcome some of these hurdles and D&I biases in your organizations. Sam, if you want to just move that along. Okay, so before we kick off, I just wanted to get a sense really of who's in the room with us today. So you can just raise your hand on this. I think it's probably easiest. Question 1, have you ever joined an unconscious bias training or any kind of training around D&I previously? Just raise your hand if you have. Okay, we've got 1 person. Great. Have you ever personally experienced bias when applying for a role? This may be something that you're aware of. Obviously, it may also not be, but has there been any obvious biases against you? Perhaps it's because of your age, your background, any disabilities, even gender, anything like that people have faced previously. Danielle raising her hand. Do you think that you might have any biases, conscious or unconscious or subconscious? Yeah, I'm going to raise my hand on that one as well, because I know that I definitely do, regardless of my efforts in these processes. And finally, where are you employed? Are you currently employed by an RPO or an MSP? Just to give a sense of who's in the room, really. Anybody here from those backgrounds? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Good to know. So we have, I think, varied experiences and backgrounds in the room, which is good because we're going to start with understanding a little bit more about the demand for these types of solutions and really where the pressures are coming from on recruiters, on RPOs, on MSPs, and indeed on internal hiring teams. First of all, the pressures quite often are coming from candidates themselves, and increasingly so as we speak to Gen Z. 76%, according to a recent Glassdoor survey, said that diversity and inclusion is a key element when they're looking to move jobs or to make a decision about a new role. So it's something that people actively look at in terms of the process that they're going through, as well as the business that they are applying to. Secondly, if you want to click away, Sam, 92% of corporate executives say that improving D&I is a top priority in their business. So These pressures are coming from external and internal stakeholders. They're coming from employees. They're quite often also coming from legislation and reporting requirements. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's also something that is helping them to win new business sometimes, helping them to stay ahead of legislation and legal matters, and indeed to attract the best talent to their teams. And finally, did you know that up to 80% of agency RFPs, and we're talking here about recruitment agencies who are perhaps pitching into larger corporate businesses, are now made up of DE&I related questions. These can be around your processes, your understanding of biases and how you're mitigating those, and indeed whether you're able to present diverse teams and a diverse shortlist of candidates if it's a role that you're looking to source for. So there are various different pressures here that are coming up. Sam, if you want to move to the next slide. I just want to explain a little bit about what the real picture is within businesses quite often, because I think we all see on LinkedIn and maybe on websites and perhaps, you know, businesses sponsoring different events or sitting on panels that, you know, there's a lot going on in the DE&I space. In actual fact, that can be true, but we have to look also at how effective some of those methods and practices and ideologies are. According to research that we carried out amongst large businesses, we found 85% of them had active D&I practices, 65% had a dedicated D&I person or D&I people internally. However, 55% had no tools or strategies in place. So they had good intentions, but actually making them happen and making a change was proving really difficult for them. And 30% couldn't measure how effective any of these things that they did have in place were, and no way of measuring diversity and inclusion within their business. The difficulty around that is if you can't measure what you're doing, then unfortunately it's very difficult to get the job done, or indeed to improve and move towards your goals that you may have set out in these active D&I practices that you supposedly have in your business. So there is a little bit of a skewed picture between what people intend to do and actually what's being carried out within businesses. Thank you, Sam. This is going to involve a little bit of clicking. So if you want to maybe click away a little bit, we can reveal some of the pressures that recruiters are facing. And as I go through these, perhaps just raise your hand if it's something that you are facing as an organization or as a recruiter yourself. So certain things that we've noticed within our client pool and those that we speak to are specifically around having to source diverse shortlists, and indeed sometimes losing fees because there isn't a diverse enough representation of candidates on those shortlists by recruiters. Ensuring bias-free processes for candidates, for clients, and for internal hires. How are you doing that? Do you have the processes to help you to understand how that should work and whether it is working? Having the D&I data in the first place and understanding what you can track, how you can track it, and indeed how you can report it. There's also a real lack of confidence sometimes around diversity and inclusion. So if you're talking with clients, particularly if they are larger businesses and they have D&I representatives internally, it's quite common for there to be a very mature conversation happening there with lots of different jargon and understanding and so on. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to match up to their expectations, and indeed has led to recruiters that we know losing business based around that. Reassuring clients that you can deliver on D&I demands, as well as creating a trusted process for candidates to report their personal data. As I mentioned, D&I compliance and legislation is becoming ever more heavy, particularly in the UK and the US. So managing to stay ahead of that is also pretty challenging. Being able to answer D&I requirements on RFPs, that represents a real loss of business potentially, and one of the reasons actually why several of our recruiter clients signed up with Diversely, because they were unable to deliver answers on those RFPs to bigger companies, which would have meant that they lost out on the business. So are you able to do that? And finally, not losing out on existing business opportunities. So those where perhaps you're requested to present more diverse shortlists, or indeed D&I data. If you're not able to do that as a business, then potentially your client is going to go elsewhere. Is that something that is recognised by anyone? Perhaps just raise your hand if you've seen any of those things come into play in your industry, or your day-to-day role, or as part of your teams. Okay, James. Yeah. They're all pretty common, and they're all quite difficult to solve, actually, if you don't have a solid approach to them. Okay, Sam, next slide. So I think we're just going to take a little step back now and just try to understand a bit more about what diversity, equity and inclusion actually is before we dive into what some of those specific challenges around those pressures are and solving those pressures. Some of you may know this already, some of you may not. These definitions do kind of change over time as well. The processes and the understanding around diversity, equity and inclusion has moved on significantly, particularly in the last 3 to 4 years. But just to give you a kind of baseline, diversity is really about including or involving people from a range of different backgrounds. And there's numerous different ways of defining diversity and those characteristics. Equity is really where it all starts for many businesses. It's about having proper policy strategies, accessibility in place so that people have a fair chance at being able to be part of your organization and to be able to do their jobs. And inclusion really encompasses the whole lot. It's really ensuring that people feel included in your organization and ensuring that you're reaching out to as many people as possible and making their lives within your business as enjoyable and as productive as you possibly can. So if we want to move to the next slide, we're going to dig a bit deeper into what the diversity and inclusion elements mean. As I mentioned before, there are different ways of putting this together. So D&I, I&D, DIB, DEIB, I mean, really it all kind of means the same. And essentially it stretches across the entire employee life cycle from candidate right through to retaining and promoting that person within your organization. And diversity can be represented by the things that you are, whether those things, is something you were born with or you acquired over time. Things like gender, sexual orientation, religion, neurodiversity, those types of characteristics. And these are what are termed protected characteristics. Inclusion is really about your approach and your attitude. So as it says here, having access to a business, ensuring perhaps that there's disability access, for example, that there's flexible working hours and locations, having inclusive communications so that we're not talking in one tone to everybody, but making it as accessible as possible. And of course, having policies and opportunities that mean that everybody gets a fair chance and can participate within that organisation as well. And just to run through, I guess, some of the more recognised aspects of diversity, this is going to be another one where we're going to need to click a little bit. So, as I mentioned, there are different aspects that you can be born with, that you can be assigned, and indeed that you can acquire over time. And I'm just going to run through how they break down. Personal identity is one of them. Many of those things are things that you will acquire over time. Cultural identity is something that you are born with, but essentially you can change it yourself. Social identity, pretty much the same. You can be born into one socioeconomic status and leave this planet on quite another one. Gender and age identity obviously is something that you can't necessarily change. It's something that you're born with. However, gender can be selected over time if you choose to. So let's just have a quick look at some of those different aspects. Personality traits, ability, ethnicity, race, social class, sex, as opposed to gender and sexual orientation, are those that are given, the things that you're born with at the very beginning of your life. We move through to the next circle. We're moving into assigned. So age arguably is assigned. Your values definitely can be assigned either by yourself or by other people. your experiences over time, your nationality, depending on where you're born, and indeed that can change. Religion, yes, again, can change. And education obviously can change over time as well. And as I mentioned, socioeconomic status, income and assets, and gender can be changed over time. Okay, and then the final section is around what you choose. So your journey through life, essentially, your marital parental status, your skills and occupation, your spirituality, arguably, your industry, where you work. I think that's it, gender identity. So, you know, there are different layers essentially to this onion. And I think if we move to the next slide, we can peel some of those onions, some of those layers of the onion back. Really, the purpose here is to help you to understand how you are looking at different people. So we've seen some of the ways in which diversity plays into the workforce. We've seen some of the ways in which you can be assigned or born with diversity. But from a recruitment perspective, what are the things that we first notice and that we make decisions about within the first 5 to 10 seconds of meeting someone? Usually they are these types of things, mental, physical disability, though not always. There are many hidden disabilities, of course. Gender, work experience, if you're looking at somebody's CV, education background, again, if you're looking at their CV, age and race, those types of things we can all take a pretty good guess at just by looking at somebody. But then we get to know somebody a little bit more. Perhaps we take them to interview stage. We might understand a bit more about their social class. We might understand a little bit more about their religion if we have a conversation with them about their background, and indeed about their marital and parental status. Yeah. And then right at the very core of the onion is somebody's personality and ability. And really, it's the abilities that we want to be looking at in people. It's not how old they are. It's not which school they went to. It's not what gender they are or where they were born. It's about whether they're able to do the job. And the purpose really of getting to the core of this onion is to remove as many of those biases as possible to ensure that we can get to an equitable situation. So if you can just click again, Sam. Thank you. And these are the things that are then affected by those decisions, where somebody works, whether they get the right training, the sort of seniority that they might achieve, their management status, their compensation, obviously, the amount that they're paid. So this is all affecting the way in which somebody's career and life pans out. So it's an extremely important thing to understand, you know, where these biases might creep in, whether we like it or not, and how we can move past them in order to find the best person for the job. And just before we move on to some of the aspects that, you know, we might be seeing in terms of biases and difficulties around understanding our levels of diversity and inclusion, I just want to quickly go through who we should involve in getting DE&I right. I'm not sure what all of your different roles are, but these are generally the people who, if you just want to keep clicking, Sam, we'll get all of this stuff up. These are generally the people who are involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, it really does take the entire organisation to understand why this is important and to make it part of everybody's day-to-day. In terms of perhaps who we would speak to get the ball rolling on this stuff, definitely business and HR in terms of leadership. So they understand the strategic perspective, they understand the pressures from both a business, a client, a candidate, and a reporting point of view. We also need buy-in from the people and hiring managers. So those that are really in control of these processes of hiring different people and managing the people that are sourcing different candidates. And then obviously we need the action and the delivery from talent acquisition and recruitment professionals, because they're responsible for the talent pipeline and the delivery of that talent pipeline, and indeed how diverse it might or might not be. So let's move into the second part of the presentation around really where some of the issues are around perhaps not delivering on diversity of talent pipelines, and really kind of not getting rid of those biases at the very root of the problem, which is often at the very, very top of the funnel. We start with data, and the reason that we start with data is because if in any area of business you don't understand what your numbers are, it's very difficult to understand whether you're making improvements, whether you're reaching your goals, or indeed what those goals should be in the first place. Gathering data on diversity and inclusion is really complex because the rules will differ depending on where you are in the world, and sometimes even where you are within a country. There are actually 15 recognized protected characteristics. Our technology tracks against 8 of them, some of those that we've talked about previously. But it's really important that only the essential data is gathered from a trust perspective and also from a legal GDPR perspective, and that is stored safely. And it's important to understand which elements can be captured automatically and which need to be volunteered, as well as understanding your levels of data overall and ensuring that that is all anonymized and aggregated so that there can be no attachment of protected characteristics against a particular candidate. And there's going to be a bit of clicking here as well, Sam. So once we get to grips with our data and we understand who we have in our business, what our common goals are, and indeed what our talent pipeline is looking like across different characteristics, you might not choose to track against all of them. You might just want to choose a couple that you're struggling with, perhaps gender, perhaps age. We then have another issue around essentially human bias. I think we can probably all agree that we have some biases one way or another, whether we like it or not. And these tend to form into different categories. So I've just highlighted some of them, and I'm going to run through a few of them so that we can understand what those biases are. Now, the software that we've created removes a lot of these biases, but I think, as some of you said, you've been through unconscious bias training. It's also important to be able to recognize those biases yourselves so that you might understand when they're popping up and perhaps put them to one side if you don't happen to have software at your fingertips, which, let's face it, many people don't. So let's just have a quick run through of what some of these biases are. If you want to just click, Sam. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody's heard of any of these, but network bias, language, sample, confirmation, expectation anchor, affinity, conformity, and my personal favorite, halo and horn effect. These are some of the biases, believe it or not, that many people suffer from, many of them and all of them sometimes. So let's just run through a few so that we can understand what they mean. So network bias, I think probably you can guess what this is. It's really when you're looking at a particular sector of the population rather than casting your net as widely as you possibly can across all sectors of the population. So perhaps you've decided that you need a new engineer or a tech person, and you're really only looking at male applicants, for example, or perhaps you're just looking at a particular school or university that you know, or you think you know, produces the best tech or engineering talent. That's an example of network bias. It can also be things like just getting referrals from your friends or from people in the office already. It really has the effect of limiting your talent pool. So that you're perhaps just finding replicas of those people that are already in your workforce and not diversifying the talents, skills, attributes, personalities, and backgrounds of those people that are even getting to the top of your funnel, let alone being hired at the end of it. Okay, language bias. This is something that I feel very strongly about. In my previous business, I used to rewrite by hand a lot of the job ads that came my way because my purpose was to help women to find more roles in business. And the way in which many of these job ads are written are usually quite heavily male skewed language, business language, can be quite heavily male skewed. It can be quite culturally inappropriate depending on where you are in the world. It can be quite age inappropriate, suggesting that enthusiasm and energy are things that only the young possess, which is obviously not the case, as we all know. So there's plenty of ways in which language can really impact how your job ad and how your communications comes across, and really leads candidates to deselect themselves from the process, again giving the effect of not having, unfortunately, a very broad talent group at the very top of your funnel, which again leads to a lack of diverse talent once you're actually getting to hiring. And this is a problem that we see for many businesses, and they wonder why they're not getting more female applicants, or more ethnic applicants, or those with disabilities. It's because of the way in which they're putting their communications across, not just job ads, but across their website, maybe their LinkedIn, maybe even the way that they're writing their emails, for example. Okay, let's go to the next one. Affinity bias is really not understanding the full sense of a candidate. So really kind of when a candidate presents themselves to you as a person, we all do this. We like to look for what we recognize, and the backgrounds, perhaps the education levels, socioeconomic status, religion, maybe, where someone's born. If they're born down the road from you, you automatically feel an affinity with them. I have done this myself and made terrible hires based on it. So this is a real danger, and I think it not only has the limiting power of the numbers of people that are coming into your funnel, but it also really affects the culture of your office and makes it very kind of one note, and really not having that ability to attack different problems from different angles and being representative perhaps of the population that you are trying to serve as a business. So it really does limit you on many different fronts. Number 4, just got 2 more. So expectation anchor. This is a bit of a strange one, but it basically is looking at a particular piece of information, whether it be on a CV or something that somebody says, that makes you believe that this is the right person for the job. So perhaps there's been somebody in your organization who has a particular qualification, for example, or a particular skill set, or a particular background, and they've done a brilliant job at the role, and you think that's exactly what's needed for this next person. Again, it is just creating carbon copies of people in the office and not bringing anything new to the table, and certainly not allowing you to diversify your talent pool and your team. And finally, as I said, this is my favorite, halo and horn effect. It's looking at a particular aspect of somebody and deciding that that's going to make them amazing at the job, or not, perhaps. So I really like this example of somebody perhaps with tattoos not being suitable for a corporate role, perhaps not being suitable for a customer-facing role, or somebody that's selling on a shop floor, whatever it may be. It just, when you think about it, is ridiculous, but it is a sort of brain shortcut that many of us take. It does not reflect that person's abilities. It doesn't reflect their personality and their skills. And therefore, it comes down to a rather large bias on our part. But as I said, the brain likes to take shortcuts on these things, and that's often what happens. And again, obviously, the result is replicating a lot of what you already have and not diversifying your talent pool and your teams. So let's just skip over to the next slide. I think we've probably been through these, but unfortunately, if you're not reaching out to as many people, if you're not finding as many people at the top of your talent funnel, it means that inevitably the diversity of your teams is going to be reduced, and increasingly so over time. As I said, these things in terms of data, you can start to collect this carefully yourselves through volunteering data from candidates and asking questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions as long as you're storing the data carefully, as I mentioned. And then being aware of some of these biases can all help you to reduce them and to find more diverse talent and to attract more underrepresented groups to your business. However, there are ways in which you can also resolve this using technology, and this is the technology that we've created. And there are three things, really, three parts to it. First of all, helping you to capture, track, measure, and benchmark data, helping you to create inclusive communications and to reach out to more talent. And finally, anonymizing profiles coming into your business, which is a really classic way of helping somebody to remove some of those human biases and ensure that they are selecting the best person for the job and not just the person who went to their school or whatever it may be. So just to quickly run through, because I know we're running a bit short of time and I wanted to leave some time for questions, but if you just want to click through this slide, Sam. Resolving language bias for us is really, as I said, about looking at the different phrasing, the language that's used, the structure, particularly in job ads, but certainly across a website and across marketing and communications in general. We have a tool that does this. It's called the Bias Analyzer. It was created with academics based on years and years of biased data in job ads, and it helps you with a click to look at where there may be masculine phrases, where there may be more feminine phrases, experience phrases, which points towards age, and personal phrases, so the team, the candidate, that kind of thing, which doesn't come across as terribly inclusive. So there's lots of ways in which you can be reminded of biases within job ads and then click through and select better language, perhaps, if you weren't aware of that. I think the idea here is never to get to a completely vanilla job ad so that it's 100% bias free, but just to really be aware of where some of those biases sit and to perhaps make it slightly more inclusive so that you are, as I said, not really enabling the deselection of candidates unwittingly. Network bias is really then about where are you posting your jobs? You know, if you're just relying on your LinkedIn network or your personal or professional network, or indeed recommendations from the team, then your network bias is fully in play. There are so many job boards, communities, and places out there where underrepresented talent are. They are difficult to find sometimes. Our algorithm does this for you. It will help you to understand where there are underrepresented groups within your data. It will help you then to match the best job boards for you to post out to. And we specialize in niche job boards. So let's say you're looking to up your women in tech. It will recommend the most relevant job boards for you to post to, as well as posting to all the big ones as well. So the LinkedIns, the Monsters, the Indeeds, but basically broadening your reach, widening your net, and deepening that pool of talent that you're reaching out to really get rid of that network bias that may be at play. And finally, the final part of the platform itself, as I mentioned, a really powerful way of resolving human bias is to remove any identifying factors from an application. There's a lot of heavy lifting there, right? I mean, it takes a lot to remove gendered pronouns, to remove aspects such as names, ages, dates, schools, universities, that kind of thing. The technology that we've created does that all in one go. It also helps you to understand who out of your long list of candidates, hopefully, that have applied, have the most relevant experience and are going to be able to do the job well. But basically what this is doing is ensuring that you're looking at the skills and abilities of people and not making a decision and allowing some of those biases that we just went through to come into play and pop into your head, as they unfortunately quite often do. Okay, and just to quickly run through what this means for a business. So by using some of these tricks, tips, tools, and indeed our platform, there can be an increase of up to 70% in the diversity of talent that applies. And that's actually just based on changing the language that you reach out with, we can double the relevance of the candidates applying, because we know who we want to attract, and we can ensure that we're targeting that through finding the right job boards and different communities to post out to. And finally, we can increase the data. So by using our tools, for example, you can increase the data that you're capturing on candidates through AI and indeed through volunteered information by up to 90%. But any kind of tracking and measuring for many businesses, as we said at the beginning, is an improvement. So it's always a good place to start, so that you can look back and see whether you're moving towards your goals. And that is where we finish. I know